You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. The Centre for Fortean Zoology has been hunting for unknown creatures for over 30 years, and I'm delighted to welcome the director of the CFZ, John Downes, to the show. From the Chupacabra to the Beast of Exmoor, to Bigfoot, ABCs and the Owlman, John shares some of his stories and experiences from his career for us to enjoy. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/Mysteries and Monsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes guaranteed, early releases, bonus content, and more. You can also click the link in the show notes as usual, and thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support. Mysteries and Monsters is across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for episodes and news. Please also visit our exclusive merchandise site for t-shirts, mugs and more via TeePublic, and the link for that's in the show notes too. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful art, and the show is produced by Mr. Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys. Let's head out on the hunt for unknown animals in the company of John Downes. Back in 1992, Jonathan Downes embraced a lifelong love of monsters to set up the Centre of Fortean Zoology. Since then, the CFZ has investigated all manner of strange reports around the world, releasing countless books and journals, and I am delighted to welcome Jonathan to Mysteries and Monsters for the first time. John, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. It's lovely to be here.
It is fascinating, John. Whilst we've got to know each other away from doing the show and stuff, you're someone I've seen to have known all my life. You're one of those people like Richard Freeman or Dr. Carl Schuker that I think, because I've read the Fortean Times for so long, I feel like I've always known you.
It was even weirder when Richard and I shared a house.
I can imagine.
Life got very strange.
I mean, prior to you forming the CFZ, John, as I said, you've always had an interest in strange and weird things all your life, but you've also got a real sort of track record and career working in the music industry, primarily with Steve Harley and doing a lot of work with him. Is it something that, from that kind of counterculture era of the late 60s into the 70s, that Forteanism is something that's quite closely related to music and performance?
It's quite closely related to what these days people would probably call old hippie bullshit. I'm basically an old hippie, and I have been a second generation hippie. I'm from the generation that grew up in the late 70s. And that opened my mind to all sorts of strange possibilities. And then becoming friends with dear old Doc Shiels, God rest his soul. I loved that man very much. He died about a year ago. And becoming friends with him opened my mind beyond all recognition.
So how did you come into Doc's orbit then, John? Was this in regards to, were you investigating something in Cornwall, or were you at an event or something, or did your paths cross for other reasons? Because obviously Doc was primarily sort of down in the southwest of the UK for most of his investigations, wasn't he?
Yes, and that, and the west of Ireland. He was living in Ireland most of the time by the time I met him. But I met him by accident at the first Fortean Times Unconvention. And I'd been flogging copies of the first issue of the magazine that we've been putting out now for 31 years, Animals and Men. And I was selling the first issue out of a briefcase in the bar at Uncon. And I found myself sitting next to Doc, and we were exchanged pleasantries. I knew who he was. He had no idea who I was. I gave him a copy of the magazine, and up came a reporter from the Guardian, came up and said, "Gentlemen, you're obviously something very important here. Can I interview you? First of all, who are you?" And Doc said, "Lock your sacks and fucking bollocks. I'm the wizard of the fucking Western world, and this fat bastard here sitting next to me is Britain's leading cryptozoologist." And the fucking Guardian printed it. I was fucking nobody. I was just this guy who was sort of crypto fanboy who produced one issue of the magazine I didn't think anyone was going to buy. But come the weekend after the first Fortean Times Convention, I was Britain's leading cryptozoologist. So I thought, well, shit, I better sort of live up to it. So that's how I met Doc. And we were friends right from then, right up until he died. God bless him.
Yeah. So what was your sort of origin story in regards to getting into cryptids, John? Were you one of those people that had been intrigued by stories of the Yeti coming out of the Himalayas and the work of Ivan Sanderson, or was this just, stumbling across folklore, myths and legends from the UK and obviously the big sort of wave of Bigfoot reports that came across in the 60s?
That because I was brought up and I spent my whole childhood in Hong Kong, which was then a British Crown colony. And this is where you start getting hate mail in about how I'm a colonialist and things. Look, guys, I was 11 when I fucking left Hong Kong. I can't really be held responsibility for British foreign policy over the last 200 years. But I was brought up in Hong Kong. My father was a senior member of the Hong Kong government. And every Thursday, my mother used to go into town and she used to go and play tennis with her friends, have coffee, play tennis, and then she went to the library and she'd get thrillers for my dad, picture books for my little brother, and animal books for me because I was obsessed with animals. And one day she brought back this book called Myth or Monster, and I've been trying to find it ever since. I think it was a Chinese knockoff of On the Track of Unknown Animals by Bernard Hoifmans. Because at the time, both in the Republic of China and in Communist China, there was a brisk trade in pirated records and pirated books from the West. And I think it was probably a knockoff of Hoifmans' On the Track of Unknown Animals. But I read this book and it completely and utterly blew me away. I was always interested in animals. I was fascinated by the natural world. And whereas if I'd been brought up in England, you might occasionally see a fox or a badger or a roe deer or whatever, in Hong Kong, every winter there were tigers and occasionally leopard. And it was well within living memory that crocodiles have been found there. And it was a rich and wonderful place for a wildlife-obsessed little boy to grow up. And now I read this book and it totally blew me away. And it was one of the three great epiphanies to happen in my life. The other two being when I discovered the girls were different to boys and when I first heard the Sex Pistols. And those are the three things which completely, depending which way you look, it either completely fucked my life or it set me on my career path that I've followed ever since. And then I went to school the next morning and my teacher was a lady from Northern Ireland who I was terrified of. She looked very, very old. I mean, she's probably younger than I am now. And she had a big shock of grey hair, and she was called Mrs. Alexander. And I can't do the accent. I can just about do Doc Shiels' Southern Irish accent. I can't do an Ulster accent. But she was said, "So, children, what are you going to do when you grow up? George, what do you want to be when you grow up?" "I'm going to be a soldier like my daddy." "Well done, George." "Billy, what are you going to be when you grow up?" "I'm going to be a postman." "And well, if you want to be a postman, that's good." Jeremy, what do you want to be? I want to be a train driver. Jonathan, what do you want to be? I'm going to be a monster hunter, miss. And she looked at me down her glasses. You impudent child. Monster hunter, my hat. And you're never going to amount to anything if you don't learn your 9 times table. Well, Mrs. Alexander, I think you're probably dead now. God rest your soul as well. There seems to be an interview all about dead Irish people. But you're probably dead now, and I still don't know my 9 times table. And I've been a professional monster hunter for the last 30 plus years. So that shows you were wrong, I think, my dear. So does that vaguely answer your question?
Of course, absolutely. I suppose, John, what was the first kind of creature or expedition that you guys began to plan? Because, I mean, I suppose some people would say, well, it's very easy to set something up and say you're going to be the centre for Fortean Zoology. But was it in regards to getting people to gravitate towards you, to assist you, or to be involved in planning and investigating certain cases? Did you have a hit list in those early days, and certain people that you wanted to work with?
Still haven't done now, but being silly, being sensible for men, the fact that I was endorsed by Doc Shiels and endorsed by Carl Schuker basically gave me a leg up that I would never have had otherwise. And so lots of people came and joined. And right from the beginning, we started research, first of all, in England, but within 5 years of starting the CFZ, I was in Puerto Rico with a Channel 4 film crew investigating the chupacabra. So it's a matter of putting your mind to it and not believing it when anyone tells you something's impossible.
I suppose as well that period of the early 90s, it did seem, and I know some people will often say it's all down to the X-Files, John, but I think there was a lot more going on than just the X-Files, because it was popular, but I don't think it was that popular.
It wasn't just the X-Files. It was a mixture of the X-Files, the 50th anniversary of Roswell. That made a hell of a difference. And at the time, there were, I think, 7 different newsstand magazines all about broadly Fortean or paranormal subjects. And I split up with my first wife that's a polite way of saying that I had something to do with it. She buggered off and left me in July 96. And in order to pay for an extremely expensive divorce, I suddenly became an expert in all sorts of subjects I knew nothing about, particularly UFOs. I knew nothing about UFOs and cared less, but there were 4 or 5 different UFO magazines on the market, so I went into W.H. Smith's in Exeter. I bought a copy of each of them. I went to bed for the weekend. I got very stoned and I read them all, cover to cover. And on the Monday morning, I phoned up all the editors and said, "Hello, my name's Dan. I'm a UFO expert. Would you like me to write for you?" And much to my amazement, they all said yes. And give me 3 months, I was a UFO expert. I knew all the people on the scene. I became close friends with people like Nick Redfern, who was another one of the people who he and I got very closely sort of identified with each other over the years. And so it's a mixture of basically bullshit and good luck, and the fact that I'm very good at hanging out with celebrities in bars, which is basically all I did in my music career as well.
But that's a very unique skill set in itself, John. I think sometimes when you've wandered around in those particular circles, it's all about how you carry yourself. I think often when you've got that kind of celebrity company in the bar.
Yes, I think so. And it's not so easy now, mainly because you can't smoke in public anymore. And I quit smoking about 8 years ago anyway. But when I used to go into a place, because I am 6'7", and I used to have hair all the way down here, and I used to wear a leather jacket, and I used to smoke a cigarette with style, and I looked like I was supposed to be places. And so I'd go in, and that's how I've made a lot of close friends who I've been friends with ever since, both in the music business and in the weird shit business.
I suppose when you look back at that period, when I look back at it, I mean, obviously I was sort of dipping my toe into it, John, and like you say, picking up the magazines on the newsstands and enjoying the occasional documentary. The Chupacabra, I think, in the mid-90s was the perfect case to kind of elevate cryptozoology at the time, because often when we talk about strangeness or monsters, people go, oh, well, Nessie's not that regular really, and we haven't had that big flap, and obviously Yeti, you could kind of say, was the thing of the 50s, Bigfoot was the 60s and 70s, and we'd not really had anything sort of new and fresh in the world of monsters. And then all of a sudden we start getting these reports out from Puerto Rico and some other territories that as it developed, that we'd got this weird monster that seemed to be obsessed with killing chickens and livestock in the area, and it just exploded. Do you think it was a perfect storm, really, John, that the Chupacabra seemed to come across at the right time when people were actually looking for weird stuff?
That and Beast of Exmoor. Because if I wrote a scientific paper saying with a title like something like on the discovery of feral specimens of Felis concolor living in West Country moorlands, people might say, oh, that's interesting, and forget about it. When I write, Beast of Exmoor kills again, it grabs the public by the short and curlies. Because I don't know who it was who came up with the name Beast of Exmoor. I do know who it was who came up with the name Beast of Bodmin, but I don't know who it was who came up with the Beast of Exmoor, but it was a brilliant piece of marketing, because that's the sort of title that they give to serial killers and serial rapists and all-round nasty people in society, you know. And the word, and Black Panther has been used for a violent political group. It's been used for a rapist. It's been used for a superhero, and it's been used for a serial killer. And so the mixture of having the Beast of Exmoor and reports of a Black Panther being seen in the area. In fact, I think in Britain, at least, that was a bigger perfect storm than Chupacabra.
I remember the Beast of Exmoor being on the BBC 6 o'clock news when they were covering the Marines being out there looking for it.
After about 1991, whenever they talked about the Beast of Exmoor being on the news, it was usually me that they interviewed about it. I remember the BBC sending me down to Bodmin when there was that really big flap that had taken place after those two kids found the skull in the waterfall.
Yes.
But which turned out to be nonsense. It turned out that it was a skull that had been found, a skull that you could see the holes in the back of the skull where it had been screwed into a leopard skin rug. But that provoked an enormous amount of public interest. And I remember going into Bodmin, driving down the A30 into Bodmin. There was this big graffiti up on the wall. Fuck you, DEFRA. What are you going to do about it? And a bit further on, how long before a child is killed? And these were this was enormous graffiti up because people were terrified. And I thought it was my job to try and calm calm down the public's terrified. The public's fear, if I could do something to try and allay those fears, but also make a few quid out of it at the same time. And I got very much involved with the big cat reports. And then, of course, my big thing, and the thing that put the CFZ on the map, and it's still the thing I'm best known for, is the Owlman in Cornwall.
Mm-hmm.
Even now, I mean, when dear Matt Page has invited you and me both to go to his gig in September, the thing he wants me to talk about is the Owlman. And I've been talking about the Owlman now for 30 years. But I am a person without blowing my own trumpet who knows most about it now that Doc's dead.
Well, yes, very true. I suppose, before I get to the Owlman, I mean, the thing about not just the Beast of Exmoor and the Beast of Bodmin, John, this seems to be something that's dogged us for, ironically dogged, using the term dogged, for about 40 years now, that we have countless reports from around the United Kingdom, from the tip of Scotland all the way down to Cornwall and everywhere in between, it would seem, of big cats. We've had
the Surrey Puma was 1963.
Yes, of course, yes. There's been numerous non-native cats killed in the country and recovered. We've had police reports, bodies recovered. Do you think that it's one of those things? Because often when the Beast of Bodmin and the Beast of Exmoor were often mentioned, you could see that kind of official response to it by newsreaders or journalists, where they'd kind of be quite snide about the people who were having these encounters, John, and basically saying, well, you know what people in Devon and Cornwall are like, and it's the same when farmers report things about ABCs Yeah, exactly. Do you think that's been one of the biggest battles in regards to having this subject treated seriously? Because I'm not really sure how much evidence, other than somebody shooting one live on television, is required to prove that they're here. Because I'm absolutely convinced, with the amount of evidence and the witnesses and the DNA that's been done and the sightings, it's beyond argument.
Yeah, we've got leopard DNA from hares that were found just up the road. And we've got footprints and photographs of kills. Richard Freeman's examined kills. There's no doubt they exist. I mean, I've seen them twice. And there's absolutely no doubt they exist. But the big problem is that the government, or rather successive governments, have always denied it. It's understandable why they deny it, because governments work on a policy of creative inertia. If they admitted that these things exist, which they do, they'd have to do something about it. And just imagine for a moment the absolute amount of red tape that would happen if the government came up and if, for once in his life, Keir Starmer told the truth and said, yes, boys and girls, we have big cats in the British countryside. They would have to sort out the insurances for every holiday camp, every camping site, every Boy Scout camp, every Ramblers Association, everything. They'd all have to have expensive and comprehensive insurance just in case they got jumped on by a leopard. Farmers would then demand that, as these things aren't natural members of the British livestock, they would demand, as they were introduced by people, that they would have to have insurance against livestock losses. So all the DEFRA inspectors would have to be taught how to recognise big cat kills, how to recognise big cat footprints, what to do when there's a big cat kill, how to organise the payouts to the farmers. This would go on and on and on. And I think you've got a similar situation in America with Bigfoot, because I think the evidence is that Bigfoot does exist. But can you imagine the enormous number of cans of worms, even more than would happen in Britain if we admitted the big cats existed, if the American government were to admit, yes, there is a hairy hominin that's not human living in the forests? Does it get free health care, social services, social security? The churches would want to know, does it have a soul, and should you send missionaries out to it?
Mm.
It would tie up everything in the American government, even worse than it's tied up at the moment. It would tie it up for years.
Mm.
So I think that's the main reason that, yeah, of course there's a cover-up. And there's lots of government cover-ups. They just don't want to have to open the can of worms to actually do something about it.
I remember I was watching Expedition X, which is Josh Gates' one of his shows on the Discovery Channel last year, John, and I got very excited because firstly they'd sent 2 Americans to Chesterfield, which I thought was a bit of an experience for them, I can imagine. However, they were out and about dealing with local farmers in this particular area, which I thought was quite odd for an American film crew to pick the Peak District rather than, say, Exmoor or Bodmin, John. They got a black cat on film. It's probably the best, clearest footage that's ever been seen. It just outside of Hathersage, which is obviously the resting place of Little John of the Robin Hood legends. Once you see that, it's you can't argue against it, John. It's clearly a large, big black cat stalking around at night that walks straight in front of the camera. There's no if, buts or maybes. It's certainly not a domestic because they went back and measured the tree and the size of it, and you could tell it's about the same size as a Labrador. I mean, that was 12 months ago. I've seen next to nothing in the mainstream media about it, as though it, as you say there, it seems to be deliberate ignorance.
Also, these days, traditional newspapers and magazines don't exist anymore. And newspapers only exist to sell advertising and to sell whatever piece of sensationalist tripe the next thing is. You'd have thought that decent film of a black cat in the Peak District would be sensationalist enough for them. But, I don't know, possibly Victoria Beckham lost a toenail or something that week. So I'm very cynical about the media. I used to be a journalist.
Yes.
I've been a journalist on and off all my bloody life. Mostly a music journalist, but I've been a journalist on and off all my life, and it's not something these days I'm proud of admitting.
I must admit, I feel my blood begin to boil, John, when I spot a blatant advert dressed up as a news item often. When they try and tell us about what Google or Apple are doing. Well, this isn't news, it's an advert.
It's what they used to call in my day, I don't know if they still do, advertorial. Which is which is an advert dressed up as editorial content.
Yeah,
and yes, it makes me very angry as well. Even though I have to admit I have written them on occasion, but each man has his price, and mine is nowhere near as high as yours.
Well, as you mentioned before, we dived into black cats for a while. The Owlman is one of those things. I think it's you can tell how Fortean somebody is, John, or how well read they are in regards to how familiar they are with Owlman, because I think it's one of those things that occasionally you'll mention to certain well-known researchers, and they can look at you quizzically as though they've never come across it. I know some people, Ken Gerhardt's spoken about it, and his most recent book, he does cover the Owlman quite extensively in that. But Ken's obviously a bit of an Anglophile as well. He's visited here several times. He's got a lot of time for the UK.
I'm very, very fond of Ken. I've known him 25 years or something now, and he's a lovely, lovely guy.
Yeah. He is. He's a smashing man. I always enjoyed spending time in his company. He's a very kind and generous man, and I've really got to know him quite well, and his partner. So it's always good to speak with Ken, because he always seems to have a fresh eye on things that sometimes other people may just run with. Whereas Ken's still quite, obviously with his work that he did at San Antonio Zoo as well, Ken clearly had a foot in both camps, and I think that's always been one of his key strengths. But the Owlman does seem to be one of those that isn't probably as well known as it should be, especially here in the UK, John.
Yeah, I'm always surprised that it's not better known. If you want to know about it, kiddies, go out and buy my book. But yeah, I'm surprised it's not better known, but I think it is so grotesque and so absurd that the mainstream media, even back when they were relatively reputable, used to ignore it because it was just so goddamn weird. And then one of the most pivotal characters involved in it was Tony Shiels. And Tony Shiels was open and vocal in his support for Irish republicanism. So newspapers didn't want to do stories on this weird drunk Irishman who presumably supported the IRA. And so they didn't. But yeah, it's always been a subject that's fascinated the hell out of me ever since I first read about it.
I mean, I would imagine most people listening to this probably aren't aware of it, John, because obviously I've got the majority of my listeners come from North America. So can you give us a brief synopsis of what and when the Owlman was for these people who may not be aware of it, and then encourage them even more to go out and buy your book on this fascinating creature?
Okay, go back in your little time machine to Good Friday, 1976, when a family called the Mellings from Stockport in Lancashire were on holiday in Cornwall, and they'd arrived down late on Maundy Thursday, which is, for you Americans, Maundy Thursday is the day before Good Friday. I don't think you have... Sometimes it's called Black Thursday in America. But they came down late on the Thursday night, and they parked up outside the church at a place called Mornan Smith, which is about 8 miles from Falmouth in South Cornwall. And the weird thing about Mornan Smith is that although the church is a very old one, it's not in the village. The church is actually quite a way outside the village, surrounded by woods, and there are old Iron Age earthworks, pre-Christian Bronze Age earthworks, pre-Christian earthworks in the middle of the what's now the graveyard, which is quite interesting. And the two little girls of the Melling family went off to explore in the woods. In those days, it was okay. It was safe to let people used to let their kids go out and explore in the woods. Whereas I'm not sure these days most people let their preteen daughters go out and explore in the woods. But they went off to explore in the woods while Mum and Dad set out a picnic lunch, and suddenly there were screams. And the two little girls came running out of the woods saying that they'd seen, quote, a nasty feathered bird man hovering above the church. And they were absolutely terrified. And Mr. and Mrs. Melling did their best to calm them down, but they were so frightened, so freaked out by this, that this was to no avail, so they took them back to wherever it was they were staying, a campsite or a hotel, I can't remember. And the next day, they went to a steam affair, a traction engine affair in Penryn. And one of the people someone running a sideshow at this traction engine fair was Doc Shiels, and he was running a Punch and Judy show. And I don't know, do they have Punch and Judy in America? Is this something?
I think that's very quintessentially British,
is this
isn't
something the colonials will understand? Punch and Judy is is a stylized puppet show. It's derived from the Italian medieval Punchinello puppet stories, but this is a much more vulgar British version of it.
Surprising we'd do that, John.
Of course, we're good at vulgarity. Vulgarity begins at home, as I always say. But
certainly does.
He was doing a conjuring show, and he was doing the puppet show, and he was quite well known in the area as being somebody who knew about the local ghosts, the local monsters, the local spooks, and he'd been involved very much in sightings over the previous 2 years of a sea monster, which Tony claimed was called Morgar, which he said was the old Cornish word for sea dragon. I hate to say this, but I've never yet been able to find any substantiation for that claim that doesn't go back to him. And the fact is that Morgar is also an anagram for ragworm. Ragworms, for you people in America who may not know, and I'm not being silly here, I really don't know what species of polychaete worm you have in North America, but they're about this big. They live in mud and silt at low tide, and fishermen go to dig them up, so they make great bait. The fact that the word Morgar and the word ragworm are essentially the same, I think that's amusing, and I think it's the sort of thing which would have amused Tony. So I don't know if it's true that there is a tradition of the Cornish sea dragon Morgar. There certainly is a tradition of sea serpents around the Cornish coast going back centuries. But whether or not they are directly linked to the ones in 1975 and 76, I don't know. The early 1976 ones, the photographs that were produced that came out allegedly from a lady called Mary F. According to Tony, he swore until the day he died Mary F. existed. He reckoned that the Mary F. photographs were a hoax, and he wouldn't tell me who it was he thought had done it. But I did some detective work, and there was an old friend of Tony's who was playing all sorts of surrealist tricks, making images using plasticine models on glass and then taking photographs through the glass. His name was John Gordon. I met him twice. Lovely man. He's dead as well. Everybody in this story's dead. Apparently Mary F. was still alive a couple of years ago, but how she got involved, I have no idea. But according to Tony, that the Mary F. photographs he thinks were a hoax, and I think that they were done by John Gordon. But that's a long, complicated another story. And again, I'm not being totally cynical here, but my book is about 110,000 words, and it took me about 4 years to write. And I can't really sort of encapsulate it into sort of 10 minutes talking on the fly like this. But I do, like I used to say in school and maths lessons, I show my workings. I show how I did it and how I found out what I did find out. And I've always been open about the things I found out that I believe were hoaxes and the things which I don't believe were hoaxes. Anyway, Mr. Melling was told by the locals, oh, you ought to go and see Doc Shiels over there. He knows all about the local monsters. And that, if anybody notices, a Devonshire accent, not a Cornish accent, but I can't do a Cornish accent. And I'm sure that you folks out there in the colonies won't really know the difference, so it doesn't matter. And he went over to Doc Shiels and accused Doc Shiels of having set up a model monster to frighten his children. And Doc was a very dear, sweet, kindly man. And I knew him for about 20, I knew him, golly, for about 30 years. And he was a very kind, sweet man. And he was the last person to play malicious tricks and frighten children. Malicious tricks and frighten adults, yes. Malicious tricks and get adults to pay off his bar bill, yes. But he wouldn't frighten children. And he tried to calm Don Melling down. And he got the two little girls to draw pictures of what they'd seen. Now, again, there are quite a lot of bits of confusion here because the pictures which were published in the Fortean Times a couple of months later were not the originals. No one knows what happened to the originals, if indeed they actually existed. But there are at least 3 different versions of the pictures. They're only slightly different. But remember, in those days, you didn't have a photocopy shop on every street corner like you have now. Every town's got a place where you can use a photocopier. Most libraries have got, and they didn't back in 1976. So the fact that Doc got his daughters to copy these pictures is not a sign of something sinister, like Mark Travinsky. He's another person who's dead, claimed that Doc did this in order to muddy the waters and this was a pure hoax on his behalf. It wasn't. It was purely because in Britain we didn't have, especially in Falmouth, which was the back end of beyond by then. Because remember, until they built motorways, and the M5 motorway still doesn't go any further than Exeter, and the M5 motorway, I think, didn't go further than Bristol until about 1976. Down in Cornwall, where there wasn't even a dual carriageway road going down there, it was the middle of nowhere. And it was populated by old Cornishmen, farmers, and hippies who found that they could move down there because it was cheap and because you could grow marijuana and the local policeman didn't know what it was. And it was basically a place for the age of Aquarius to blossom. And so when Doc Shiels, who he always hated hippies, but he was known to smoke the odd suspiciously long cigarette. And back in the day, I know he did acid a few times, and him and I used to drink like fishes. And yes, I did take drugs with Doc on occasion. And he always hated hippies, but he was quite prepared to join in that sort of side of the hippie culture. The fact that he got his daughters to draw these pictures, there's nothing at all sinister about it. Now, the thing that gets weirder is that these sightings continued. The next ones were in July when 2 girls called Barbara and Christ, I can't remember the other one's name. That's awful. It'll come to me. They were camping in the woods and they saw the Owlman as well. And I actually interviewed one of these girls many years later. This was 1976 when they saw it, and it was about 1998 when I interviewed the girls. The bizarre thing is now that it's longer ago when I interviewed the girl than it was between the time she saw it and the time I interviewed her. Really, time has run away with us all. But the Owlman sightings continued. And there were a whole string of them. And then in 1989, there was a sighting by a young man who I will call Gavin. He's an old friend of mine. And he's a very well-known scientist these days, and he really doesn't want me to use his real name because he thinks that to admit to having seen something as grotesque and completely bizarre as the Owlman back when he was a young teenager would probably not do his career any good. And although I don't have a career, I've always done exactly what I wanted, I do understand this guy's feelings about that. But anyway, I met Gavin through a whole series of weird misadventures. Again, they're in the book. And I invited him down to stay for the weekend with me and my first wife. And this was about 6 months before Alice and I parted. And I interviewed him in very, 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 very depth. And I've still got the tapes of the interview somewhere. And I was completely convinced that what he was telling me was, to use the horrible modern expression, his truth. At least he believed completely in what he'd seen. And that he had seen something 4 or 5 feet tall with crab-like pincers, black eyes, grey feathers, and a upside-down crescent-shaped black hole instead of a beak for a mouth. And he'd seen this thing along with his girlfriend at the time. And personally, I think the only reason he did see it was because he was there with his girlfriend. He's one of only 2 men I know to have actually seen the Owlman. The other being an elderly bloke who was looking out of a pub window at the bottom of the Helford Passage, looked up and saw this huge grey bird flying across the river. But apart from those 2, all the sightings have been women. Most of them have been young women. A lot of them have been women reaching puberty for the first time, including Gavin's then girlfriend. And I think that it's in the same way as now, it's reasonably accepted that poltergeist activity usually has an epicenter alongside emotionally disturbed or pubescent girls. I think the Owlman has a similar but more complicated genesis. I could carry on for hours, but if I did, you won't all come along to see my talk at the what's it called, Strange Days in September.
Absolutely. Well, it's a case that's always intrigued me, like you say, because I'm able to see these weird patterns about most of the witnesses being women, young women. It is a very odd facet of that particular case, and like you say, it seems to be really overlooked these days. And as you say, you always get people trying to muddy the waters in all kinds of cases. I've always been fascinated by the amount of people who insert themselves into cases that they've never been involved in or claim to be responsible for, John, which I think is a whole Fortean field in itself of why people are desperate for attention. They'd like to pretend that they're terrorising entire neighbourhoods for some reason, dressing as all kinds of creatures.
I know one person who he's dead. He was a very well-known big cat researcher who wrote this incredibly bad book which he wanted me to publish, in which he claimed that when he was in the 1950s doing his national service in the RAF, the Roswell aliens had been transported across the Atlantic to an RAF base in Somerset. And I've got this fucking book and it's unreadable. It is so bad. And I'm not going to, because of his wife and family, I'm not going to mention names, not unless somebody pays me a lot of money.
Well, I mean, like you say, I think the Cornish sea serpent, I've seen people completely dismiss it because Doc was involved in it. But I've also seen one of the families who were sailing off the Cornish coast that didn't involve Doc, who gave a television interview and were absolutely adamant. I think the dad said, "Oh yeah, I've been sailing all my life. I know what a seal looks like. I know where the whales are. I'm telling you, I've seen a sea serpent." And I think that's 45 years ago. So it might have been from around that flap you mentioned about the mid-70s, John.
Well, that's why I was so impressed by Gavin. Because Gavin was nothing to do with Doc Shiels. There's no link between them. They never met. They exchanged letters once when he was in his late 30s. But at the time when I interviewed him and he was 17, they'd never met. And so all the people who say, "Oh, I don't believe this, Doc Shiels was a hoaxer." No, he wasn't. Doc Shiels was a trickster, which is something very different. He was also a surrealist who liked playing games with words, and he liked playing games with imagery. He liked playing games with the truth. And he saw his whole life's work, everything he did, from being a painter and a playwright and an author and a monster hunter, it was all part of surrealism. And so all the people like dear old Mark Travinsky, who dedicated a whole issue of Strange magazine to trying to show that Doc was a faker, missed the point. Mark Travinsky fucking hated me because I wrote in my book that he'd missed the point, and that Doc was running rings around him because he was a nice guy, Mark Travinsky, but he took everything at face value. And the whole thing with Forteaners, you can't take anything at face value. Everything has layers upon layers upon layers.
It is. I think the other aspect, I mean, even if we, as we have this conversation in 2025, do you still think people view Cornwall as some far-flung land, and that, that people seem to not really understand the people or the place or wherever, other than the people that go there for 1 week in August and block the motorways?
It's a place people go for the weekend to go surfing now. And because everybody's got cars these days, and there are dual carriageways going all the way down to Bodmin. So it is a strange place. It's got very little to do with the rest of England.
Yes.
I love Cornwall. I think it's wonderful. In fact, I hate to say it, I prefer Cornwall to Devon. I've lived it. But Cornwall has got very little to do with the rest of England. It had its own language until, I think, 1920-something, the last native Cornish speaker died. You can do degrees in the Cornish language now, but that's only because they're being taught by people. It's a bit like native Latin speakers. There aren't any anymore. It's a dead language.
I suppose they're both sort of become totems of a certain era, I think, John, and they just don't seem to get that kind of respect or re-evaluation outside of ourselves, perhaps, that they deserve, because sometimes you see stories from certain I'll use the term loosely, researchers here in the UK who are claiming Bigfoot's running around woods in Birmingham and up mountains in Scotland and the like, with very little evidence of doing any actual research other than reading posts on Reddit or people just emailing. I know one particular person who emailed someone with a completely made-up story and he printed it. He didn't check anything. And so while I'm always mystified why we've got people creating monsters when there are these cases out there that just need somebody to actually do some legwork, John.
Then again, it's got to be said that there have been sightings of wood roses going back centuries, if not millennia. The idea of there being a British Bigfoot is ludicrous. Bigfoot is a North American animal that, if it exists, is a flesh and blood higher primate. The hairy wild man of the forest, which has been reported for centuries in Britain, and I've seen one myself, so I know they exist, is something completely different. It's something, I hate the word paranormal, because I think these things are perfectly normal, and I hate the word supernatural, because I think these things are totally natural. They're just governed by laws of physics we don't understand yet. But there have been wood rose sightings since the year dot in Britain. But I have very little faith in some of the so-called researchers in this field. One of these days I'll chat with you off camera and I'll be interested to know which ones you... I read a book about British wood rose sightings that I thought was going to be awful, and I actually really enjoyed it. And I'm hoping this isn't the person that you're thinking about, so I'm really enjoying that book.
Well, we'll cross that bridge.
But then again, it's like I really enjoyed the Highgate Vampire book, and I don't believe a word that either David Farrant or Sean Manchester say, but I really enjoyed Sean Manchester's book.
Well, that is a prime example. I love that case. I don't think there's much truth to any of it.
I knew David Farrant. He was a mate of mine, and his widow is still a friend of mine. But it's a very, it's been overcomplicated, and most of it's bollocks.
Well, it is. I mean, it's always really intrigued me. I remember, and I've mentioned this on a couple of previous shows, I remember listening to Radio 1, I don't know, late 80s, early 90s, when Nicky Campbell was a DJ on Radio 1, and he was building his kind of conversational persona, his chat show, his interviewer, rather than being the man who played records and could be quite witty. And he had Sean Manchester on, and I'd never heard of it before, and it was a dark, stormy night. It might have been a Halloween special, John. I think if you go on YouTube, you can actually find the interview, which also features randomly a famous session musician ringing up to talk about it, which is very odd. I'm trying to remember which soul band he was in, but it's like one of what? No, it was an American guy, and they were on tour here, and he was just in. I think he was in the hotel room listening to the show, and he was so intrigued he rang in to talk about it.
And David Farrant was accused of sacrificing Graham Bond's cat.
Well, I find that hard to believe because David was a well-known animal. He had a parrot.
I like David. He was, he wasn't exactly wholesome, but he was a really nice guy.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I'm
not exactly wholesome, so I can't really...
No, same here.
Oh, come on, you're far more wholesome than me or David Farrant. Well, that's not putting the bar very high.
We'll have to take notes and compare when we meet up in September, John, and we'll see just how unwholesome I may be. But it's a case I've always been fascinated with, and like you say, I think a lot of it is exaggeration, self-promotion. It's kind of that culture of certain characters wanting to promote themselves as denizens of the supernatural and powerful warlocks and wizards and all that. But I remember being in London 4 years ago, and on a quiet Sunday night, we'd done things on the Saturday, and I think we'd done the British Museum, Natural History Museum in the daytime on the Sunday, and so we were just chilling out, watching a bit of telly. It was Halloween week, and I can't remember which channel it was, but they'd had a documentary about the Highgate vampire on, and I'm like 3 miles away from it, watching this in a hotel room in Tottenham, thinking this is the strangest bit of sort of synchronicity I've stumbled across for quite a while. And so it's always been in under my skin, that particular case, because even if, like you say, a lot of it is exaggeration and make-believe, it's still a hell of a tale, isn't it?
Oh, it's a wonderful story. It's nonsense, but it's a wonderful story. Because the thing that you have to remember is that the image of the vampire has changed immeasurably over the years. In the 18th century, up until the 18th century, the vampires were huge, amorphous, grey giants. Then, in the 19th century, along came Bram Stoker, and they became decadent aristocrats. But it wasn't until Bela Lugosi in the 1930s that the modern image of the vampire, this is up until Anne Rice then made them into sort of slightly effeminate rock stars. But before that, was, the image of the creature that is described by Sean Manchester, it's Bela Lugosi. And as I'm sure Richard Freeman, the world's only Gothic cryptozoologist, will tell you from Bauhaus, Bela Lugosi's dead. Oh, sorry guys, I couldn't resist that. But, Sean Manchester's story is pure Bela Lugosi.
Well, yes. I mean, I have to chuckle. The thing that even set me off the very first time I came across it was Manchester saying that one of the first two witnesses, her surname was Moriarty. And as soon as he said that, I thought, right, okay. My spider sense was tingling, John.
Then again, I've known a couple of people called Moriarty over the years. It's not that uncommon a name. But the chances of it being linked with... Because let's face it, there's at least one vampire story in Sherlock Holmes. So there's the chance of it being a Moriarty vampire witness is pretty dodgy.
Yeah. Well, at least the other one wasn't called Holmes. Then we'd have been really... We'd have torpedoed it straight away, John.
Elementary Dr. Bestall.
I mean, for a lot of people as well, John, the book Three Men Seeking Monsters, about yourself, Richard and Nick.
It's complete nonsense from start to finish.
Yeah, I've got friends who are interested in cryptozoology who absolutely love that.
Yeah, and the trouble is as well, for some reason, it amused... Well, I know what the reason is. It started off when I wrote a novel. I wrote my first novel, and I had Nick Redfern as a character in it, and I lampooned him. I had him as this leather-clad punk rocker whose girlfriend worked in a dominatrix club. 2 years later, he writes Three Men Seeking Monsters, in which he has me as a massively camp alcoholic. And then I wrote another book, which was actually true, in which this was about an expedition Nick and I did to Puerto Rico, my second Chupacabra expedition, in which everything I said in it happened, except every time Nick said anything, I had him say it in broad Brummie. And I had him in a bar in Puerto Rico looking really sad. And I say, Nick, what's wrong? Oh, man, or Miss Birmingham. I'm pining for the rotunda. Then Nick then wrote another true book in which it's true, apart from the bit that has me going around the village on horseback, wearing tweeds and thrashing the locals with riding crop. Out of the way, peasants, which I didn't do either. I can't ride. I've never owned a horse. I don't want to own a horse. Truth is, I'm actually scared of horses. But Nick and I spent years just lampooning each other in our books, and it went on and on and on until we got bored with it. And Three Men Seeking Monsters is nearly all nonsense. It's great fun. And I still have quite often Americans turning up on the doorstep wanting to, hey, you John Downs? Yes. I had two very camp Americans turn up on my doorstep once, very disappointed to find that I had a wife and stepdaughters, because they thought from what Nick said that I wrote that I'm some sort of gay icon, which was... I'm sure that's what Nick wanted to happen, and I thought that was naturally funny. I felt sorry about these two Americans who come all the way across the Atlantic to meet me, and they're so
But are you surprised of how much influence that book seems to have? Because, as you say, regardless, it's just a damn good yarn, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a story, and it's a very good story, but it's a novel. And I'm absolutely amazed how many people still believe it's true. Because I don't think anybody much... Well, no, I've had two people believe that my novels... So I've written 3 novels, and I had one person believe the first one was true, and one person believed the second one was true, and the third one was so fucking out there, I don't think anybody would believe it was true. But I'm always amazed when people don't realise that things are fiction. It's like people who regularly have emails, once or twice a year, from people who've seen the old X-Files episode about those parasitic worms that live in the ice. And They want to know, what will happen when the ice melt, with the melting ice caps? Will they go over and take over mankind? And I said, no, it's fiction, man.
This is very true. I mean, do you have a favourite expedition, John, or a favourite cryptid that you've gone on the hunt for over the years, working with the CFZ? Obviously, as you mentioned, you've been out looking for the chupacabra and other such notable ones.
I love Puerto Rico. I've been there twice. I'd go back like a shot. And if I had enough money and the world was a different place, I would go out and I would buy a shack up in the mountains of above Canalvanas, on the outskirts of the rainforest, and spend the rest of my days there. I love Puerto Rico, and I still don't think that we've completely... I think I've come closer than most people to explaining the chupacabra story, but we're not there yet.
Well, it certainly muddies the water that they've just started using it for a creature that's got nothing to do with the original reports, which I think has really muddied the water for a lot of people who might be new to the subject or that particular cryptid as well, John.
The trouble is that I was involved pivotally in both the cryptids. I was involved with the looking for the semi-bipedal vampiric creature with the spikes down its back from the grassland plateau of Canalvanas in the middle of Puerto Rico, and I was involved in the Texas Blue Dog. I was the first proper researcher. I was certainly within the first 2 or 3 researchers to actually go to Devin McAnally's ranch at Elmendorf outside San Antonio. I went there within months of him first shooting the creature. When I say reputable researcher, by the time I got there, the both the Disney Channel and the Sci-Fi Channel have both been there already. The bag with the bones, the bin bag that had the bones of this animal in, had also got the bones of a dog that the TV company just chucked in there. They brought along the bones to compare it, and now nobody knows which bone belongs to which. And there's no point in doing DNA tests on the bones, even though I tried, because they're all going to be contaminated with dog DNA.
I suppose, in regards to the Texas Blue Dogs, though, the thing about this, I think, is it Phyllis Cannon? Yes. The lady who there was one run over outside her driveway or something, and obviously she had it stuffed and mounted. I mean, that, whatever you can say about the potential of it, there's no arguing that. It's there, it's stuffed and it's mounted, and it's an incredibly striking creature, and it just, this is the thing about cryptozoology I love, is I think people always focus on things like Bigfoot and Nessie, and they overlook the real essence of it. It's unknown animals. It's not unknown legendary animals. Yeah. It covers the whole pantheon of the animal kingdom.
Yeah, it is, and the stuff that fascinates me, which is tiny. And to be quite honest, I'm not particularly interested in. I've been to Loch Ness a couple of times, but when people say to me, "Oh, I believe in the Loch Ness monster," they don't at all. They haven't looked into it. They haven't studied it. What they mean is they don't want you to think they're narrow-minded. There is no dinosaur in Loch Ness. There is no prehistoric reptile in Loch Ness. There are no dinosaurs that aren't covered in feathers and go tweet, tweet, tweet in the world today. They all got wiped out in the Katie extinction event. Get fucking used to it. And again, the waters get muddied, and this is where I'm going to really piss off. I'm sorry in advance if I piss off some of your viewers, but there are a lot of American researchers who believe that they are looking for late surviving dinosaurs to be able to prove that the world is only 6,000 years old and was created at I'm not joking, at 4:30 in the morning on October the 15th, 4004 BC, according to the chronology of Bishop Ussher, which is nonsense.
I have to say, when I stumbled across creationist cryptozoology, John, I went outside to get a breath of fresh air, because I was like, what? And I think when you look at things like, I mean, the other prime example of this is Michele Mbembe, I think, is the poster child for that particular theme. And I think a lot of people don't dig under the surface, John, and they don't understand. I mean, obviously you had people like Roy McCall going out there in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, but Roy was a lovely guy. I knew him, lovely guy, but he was a creationist. And when he died, all his papers went to the Institute for Creation Science.
Yes, which not many people know.
You heard it here first, guys.
Yeah, well, the Ropen's another one as well, because that always makes me laugh.
Bollocks.
Yeah, well, the Ropen just means large bird. It doesn't mean dinosaur or pterodactyl or tyrannosaurus.
You see all these films of these birds with a long tail flying around. It's not a fucking pterodactyl. They're frigate birds.
Yeah. It's surprising that there are those facts, but I suppose it's like anything. You will always have people who are going in there, regardless of what field it is in the weird, I think, John, who come into it with a preconceived belief structure that they are looking for something to fit in that, and they're not bothered if it doesn't.
There's the political edge to it as well. In the 80s and 90s, there were a group of people who truly believed that the big cats in Britain had all been brought in as pets of illegal immigrants, and they were bringing them in so they could destabilise the British farming industry.
I've never heard that before. That's astonishing.
Yeah. And it's nonsense. It's complete and utter rubbish. And when you've got so many of these nut jobs around, is it really surprising that a lot of people in the media and everything don't take cryptozoology seriously because so much of it isn't worth being taken seriously.
Well, there is that aspect of it, yes. I mean, it's very similar to the dismissals of Australian big cats, because they're often said, oh, well, they were all pets that were released by American servicemen during the Second World War.
There is one of the researchers I hold high in very high esteem is Tony Healy. I don't know if you've ever had him on your show.
Yes, Tony's been on several times. He's lovely. I could talk to Tony for the rest of my life. He's marvellous.
Absolutely sweet, beautiful man. And I believe that Tony has come up with supportive evidence for the fact that some species of big cat could have been an army mascot. They weren't pets, they were regimental mascots. Because
yes, they had cougars and stuff,
from
didn't
memory, they had cougars on their, what do they call things on the shoulder? Whatever they call them, the badges that they have on their shoulder.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
They had big cats on them. So, I don't know, jury's still out on that one. But the thing that really interests me is what about big cats in New Zealand? There were no, as far as I know, American troops stationed in New Zealand during the Second World War.
Well, they've got ghost moose there anyway, as well, John. The ghost moose.
Oh, yeah. And the ghost moose, and there's also the taniwha, and the waitariki, and there's even a woodward type creature known as Coromandel Man, in a place where none of these things, except possibly the waitariki and the taniwha, can possibly exist. The ghost moose may well exist. I saw there's a video, there's a bloke who does a British wildlife podcast thing on YouTube that I watch sometimes. I see he's done a film about looking for the Fiordland moose, and I haven't watched it yet. It's one of those things I'm probably going to wait until I've got a cold and I'll watch in bed. It's sort of an hour and a half about the New Zealand moose done by a cheerful little presenter. It's quite the sort of thing I would watch in bed quite happily. But New Zealand's a fascinating place because there are no large indigenous mammals. The only indigenous mammals are 3 species of bat, one of which is probably extinct, and 1 species of rat, which almost certainly arrived in the 15th or 16th century. So that all of these things are absolutely fascinating.
How do you view the current sort of race to resurrect extinct species, John? This seems to be like the catch hook to get people into investing in these companies, because you've got this particular company. We had the whole direwolf story that turned out not to be direwolves, but by the time the truth came out, the publicity and the PR machine was way down the road, and everybody was going, oh, we've done this. And they weren't at all. They were just elongated wolves. That's all they are. They're not direwolves. They're just bigger wolves that have been genetically created. And that we've got these companies saying, oh, well, we're going to resurrect the Tasmanian tiger. We're going to resurrect the woolly mammoth. How do you view that? Do you think, firstly, for me, the Tassie is another one that I think they're there.
Yes,
I just think, once again, I think people are ignoring it.
I'm sure they are there. And people ask me what are the most likely cryptids to be discovered, flesh and blood cryptids to be discovered, and I say the Orang Pendek and Tasmanian tiger. Absolutely, without a doubt, those 2.
Yeah.
And, of course...
Do you think it's dangerous for people to do it, John?
I think it's absolutely ludicrous, because whenever mankind has tried to play God, it's never ended well. And Colossal Bioscience's ridiculous claims about dire wolves. First of all, one of the things they did was make them white. Was this because the dire wolf was white? No, it's because the dire wolves in Game of Thrones were depicted as being white. This was a way of genetically engineering a litter of wolf cubs so they appeared to be the Game of Thrones image of a dire wolf. They were nothing. Because, first of all, the dire wolves weren't specifically bigger than some of the subspecies of wolf. Second of all, we don't know what colour pelts they had. And third of all, although they've claimed, but I haven't seen any documentary proof of this, that they've mapped the genome of the dire wolf. No dire wolf DNA was used. So to claim they reinvented the dire wolf, you know why I think they did it? Within days of the announcement being made, the first person to make the announcement was Elon Musk, who at the time was still cozy with Donald Trump. And within a couple of days of the announcement being publicized, the American, I can't remember either his name or the name of his department, is basically the person in charge of the environment, what would have been the Department of Environment in Britain, said, "Oh, it doesn't matter if animals go extinct, we can always bring them back." And it was a calculated move to rip the meat out of the endangered species. And yes, you can call me a cynical old hippie, because I am a cynical old hippie. I don't trust governments.
I mean, I've often considered the pure stupidity of resurrecting the mammoth, John, primarily of where on earth are they going to put them? I know that I've heard people say, "Oh, well, we'll just dump them in Siberia," as though the mammoths will know that they're not allowed to leave or try and go somewhere else. Because, as you say, I'm not sure how many times people have to mess things up by putting animals in places they're not supposed to be. As we're talking about Australia, you only have to look at what cane toads have done there. The fact that somebody then did it 20 years later in America, despite seeing the complete failure of cane toads to eradicate those crop-eating beetles in Australia, somebody said, "Oh, we'll still do this in America. It'll work here," and it didn't. But it's one of those things that people don't talk about. The South, there's a real population of cane toads in sort of Florida, that sort of southeastern area.
I think this idea of willy-nilly trying to resurrect species is nonsense. It's a ridiculous idea. And I think it's only going to end in tears.
It's certainly very different to rewilding as well. Because some people are trying to sort of mix the two together. But you look at what we're doing here in the UK, we've reintroduced beavers. There's a strong argument for people wanting the lynx returned, wolves. And once again, as soon as the media hear about any large animal with teeth, they presume that it's just going to run around eating children all day. But you only have to look at the places where these creatures live.
With any country in Western Europe not to have wolves. Everyone else. There are even wolves in Luxembourg, for Christ's sake, and Luxembourg's tiny.
Yes. Well, I saw that story I think it was a couple of years ago. I think it might have happened during the pandemic, John, that there was this incredible footage of somebody at a playground in the Netherlands, and there was a wolf there. And they reckon it's come all the way across through the Alps and down through Germany into the Netherlands, which just shows you if you give them the space, they'll go back to where they were.
Well, it was just before the pandemic. Have you ever had Lars Thomas on your show? He's a really, really good bloke. He's in Denmark. And he phoned me up and said, "Guess what, Jonathan? He's got this lovely voice I can't mimic. And he phoned up, we have a wolf." I said, "What?" He said, "We have a wolf. I'm sending you a photograph of this wolf." And they had wolves in Denmark for the first time in over 400 years. Denmark's a tiny country.
Yeah.
Every country in Western Europe has now got wolves except for us.
Well, I think everybody's more concerned about the German raccoon population spreading, which is one of those things that most people aren't aware of until they stumble across it.
We've got crab-eating raccoons living in Britain anyway now.
Yeah, and raccoon dogs as well.
Both in Bedfordshire, I believe.
The capybaras living in the Norfolk Broads is the one that's always made me chuckle, because I ended up stumbling across an escaped population of capybaras playing golf in Italy. And I thought they were winding me up till I saw them, John. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What's going on here?
How did they hold the clubs?
Very poorly. But yeah, they'd been released from a fur farm and they'd gone to live on this golf course where they'd got some lakes. And I got within, 40, 50 feet of them. And there was a fair population. It was a good 40 or 50 family units.
I think they're fantastic creatures. I love capybaras. They're just like
I never thought I'd see them in the wild in Italy, though, John.
No, but they're just like big, cuddly guinea pigs, aren't they?
Yeah.
I've always rather wanted them.
Very much so.
Apparently they're incredibly friendly and lovable.
Yes. They seem to have an aura about them that makes everything calm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, before I let you go, John, what's next for the CFZ? What's the thing that you want to focus on, or how do you think we can continue to develop the centre and increase people's knowledge of Fortean zoology and get them away from kind of flights of fancy and focus on the real, as you mentioned, things like the Tasmanian tiger, the orang pendek, of creatures that the evidence that supports them is growing, and there is a real possibility that these wonderful creatures really are there.
Well, we're continuing with our programme of expeditions. I believe the next one is going to be to an island called Urimoti, which is the southernmost properly inhabited island of Japan, where in the mid-60s they discovered a new species of wildcat, which at the very least is a new subspecies of the Asian leopard cat. But there have been stories about a larger mystery cat, which appears to be something like a clouded leopard. Now, there's no reason why there shouldn't be clouded leopards there. It's not very populated. There's a population, a resident population, but there's a lot of virgin rainforest going up the mountain in the middle of the island. And there's no reason why there shouldn't be a population of clouded leopards there. But the interesting and most important thing is not whether there are clouded leopards there, but what are they? Because within the last 20 years, it's been shown that whereas once upon a time it was thought there was only one species of clouded leopard, there's now at least two. There's the mainland clouded leopard and the clouded leopard in what used to be the islands that used to be known as Sunderland. And no, I'm not talking about the bits around Middlesbrough. I'm talking about the islands in what in my day were known as the Malaysian archipelago. And they're two different species. Now, the Formosan clouded leopard that are found in the island that's now the country of Taiwan was only rediscovered a couple of years ago. And as far as I'm aware, nobody has yet decided whether they are the mainland species, the island species, or something completely different. They're certainly different at a subspecific level. Iriomoti is closer to the island of Formosa than anywhere else. So, if there are clouded leopards on Formosa, on Iriomoti, are they the mainland species, the island species, the Formosan subspecies, or something completely different? and I want to know the answer. So that's the next big thing that we're working on. I'm also in the process, for various reasons I won't bore you with. I'm having to move house, and I'm going back to live in the little house I used to live in when I started the CFZ in Exeter. I never did get around to selling it, so I'm moving back there. And together with Gwyn Palmer, who is my chosen successor to take over as ringmaster of the circus. In fact, she's a girl, so is it ringmistress or are you still ringmaster? I don't know, whatever, of this circus. Yes. When I retire or finally hang up my hat or drop down dead, whichever comes first, she's going to be taking over from me. And as of now, as of actually tomorrow morning, she's now editing the monthly newsletter which comes out, which I've been editing for the last 10 years. She's now editing it. As of tomorrow's, the August issue, which goes out tomorrow. And she and I are looking to rent some premises in Exeter where we can keep my enormous reference library, which is too big. I mean, I can probably fit it into my house in Exeter, but if I do, you won't be able to move on the landing or in the spare bedroom. It will all be full of books, which I'm fine with, but I would rather that they were going to be in a condition that people could actually use the library. So that's something that we're working towards. And I've still got my show, which goes out twice a week, and which you're actually on Saturday, I believe. And
yes, it was very kind of you to release that for me.
It's great fun. I enjoyed having you on. The same as I've enjoyed being on this one. Well, I want to come back again,
Thank
if
you,
please, unless you're going to tell me off for swearing too much.
No, it's not the most swearing I've had. You're fine, John.
You've had some other fucker who's sworn more fucking times than I fucking have, have you? Fuck off. Apart from that, onwards and upwards, really. I've got no intention of hanging up my hat. This is the hat I have no intention of hanging up. I've got no intention of hanging up my hat just yet. I've got no intention of dropping down dead just yet. So I'm afraid the Fortean world's going to have to carry on putting up with me for a time yet.
And long may that continue, John. Where can everybody find the CFZ, sign up, become a member, get the journals?
It is cfz.org.uk. I'm told by my tech guy, Louis, that I'm terribly old-fashioned if I say www.cfz.org.uk, and that just shows me up as being old-fashioned and totally out of touch, because these days you don't need to have a www. But whether you do or not, that's the website. You can contact me through there. You can contact Gwyn through there. You can see the blog. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can read our quarterly journals. You can read about the books we do. You can watch our web TV shows. And tomorrow night, with a lady called Carol Scott talking about her book about the mystery animals of Oceania and South Asia. But by the time we watch this, that will be in the past, but you'll still be able to see it streamed forever on the CFZ TV YouTube channel. So check it all out. Get in touch. It's lovely to hear from people. And I do my best to write back to everybody who writes to me. If not, I get Gwyn to do it because she's younger, prettier, and got more energy than I have.
Fabulous. Well, I'll put links to everything in the show notes so people can track you down, and the CFZ as well, John. And long may it continue. Thank you again for joining me. It's been a real pleasure. I always enjoy spending time in your company and speaking on a variety of issues. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in the flesh and having a great weekend, that first weekend in September.
Looking forward to it. Cheers then, mate.